Alright, my friends, let's show designated punching bag, the Oathbreaker Knight, what a mistake it is to tangle with an Archmage. I've gone ahead and started combat, and all of the buffs that we have here are passive day-long buffs from our equipment, with the exception of the Elixir of Vigilance, which is just to make the demonstration easier. Before combat began, we used Markaheshkir's free 6th level spell to cast Armor of Agathis at level 6, and now that we are in a fight, we're going to go ahead and use Quicken Spell, and we're going to cast Create Water to get the Oathbreaker Knight wet. So, doesn't matter if we hit ourselves in this, just making sure that the Oathbreaker Knight has the wet condition. Now, to show our sheer contempt, we're going to walk next to the Oathbreaker Knight and then walk directly away to deliberately provoke an attack of opportunity, which will hit us, doing 0 damage to us and 60 damage to the Oathbreaker Knight. We can also react in order to deal additional retaliation damage if we want, if we had actually taken any damage, which we didn't. As we walk away from the Oathbreaker Knight, we're then going to, at 6th level, use Witch Bolt, casting it on the Oathbreaker Knight here. Go ahead and use Destructive Wrath to maximize the damage, and we'll use Luck of the Far Realms for a guaranteed critical hit, doing 296 damage and ending the fight instantly. Alright, let's get to the build. Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today, we're combining two of the most powerful builds in the game into a single extraordinarily powerful whole, in a build I'm calling the Invincible Lightning Lord. You might be familiar with my one-shot Lightning Lord build, centered around deleting enemies in a single massive burst of spell damage, which makes it one of the game's very strongest builds. But that build does have one weakness, which is that it can die. What if, instead, that wasn't true? With this build, we're keeping all of the incredible damage and utility, but adding in the ability to tank enemy damage nigh infinitely, making this build devastating on offense and extremely forgiving on defense. It also gets access to all of the important utility spells in the game, and is, in fact, one of the game's very best support characters, in addition to the incredible damage and defenses that you get. I also think that more than almost any other extremely min-maxed build, this one is extremely fun to play, because you get tons of options and decisions every turn, in addition to the ludicrous power level. Before I begin, I do want to take a quick moment to say thank you so much to Najestum Vikingium for the 25 zlotys donation, Wanda Husbando for the £5, Tarantula for the $10, and Alito123able and Larilily for becoming channel members. Thank you so much, my friends. I really appreciate the support. It really means a lot. I'm also, as you have probably heard, trying a new audio setup today, and it undoubtedly still needs some fine-tuning, so I'd appreciate any feedback anyone has for how the audio is sounding in today's video. Alright, let's become invincible. We're using Gale as the example character here because this is primarily a wizard build and he's the wizard of the party, and I also think that more than any other build in the game, this one really makes you feel like an archmage, so I think it's perfect for a flavorful take on Gale's character. If you're building this as a custom character, then it makes an excellent main character, especially if you're happy letting somebody else do charisma checks for your party, because this build does almost everything, so if you want to experience as much of the game as possible with your main character, this is a perfect build to let you do that. If you are building this as a Tav, then what race you pick almost entirely doesn't matter for this build. We're going to get all our proficiencies and everything that we need from our class levels, so we don't need them from race pick, but there are some options that can increase your mechanical power. Not that the build really needs it, but just for pure optimization. Dwergar is the strongest overall. Their out-of-combat invisibility will let you land your burst damage combo much more reliably and start fights from advantageous positions, get surprise rounds, and so on. Halfling is always an amazing option as well. This build is extremely safe to play, and Halfling's ability to reroll ones means that your only failure case, rolling a lot of ones in a row, is vastly less likely to happen. Other good picks include Wood Elf and Half-Wood Elf for the extra movement speed, and Gnome for the advantage on mental saving throws, which are always excellent choices as well. Now, before I start leveling this character, I should mention that for most of my builds, you can customize the build significantly by changing the levels and the order in which you take them, and that's both not a problem, and in fact, I highly encourage you to do that to fit your tastes and the needs of your party. For this build, the specific levels and the order in which we take them is actually very important for various reasons. It's pretty easy to accidentally break the build if you deviate from the levels that I'm giving here. So until you're very, very familiar with the systems in Baldur's Gate, I don't recommend changing the level order or changing the build in any way from the way I presented in this video, because it's set up in a way to make all of the systems interact correctly, and it's easy to accidentally break that. At first level, we're going to be starting with a level of Sorcerer. We're going to be taking Cleric, Wizard, and Sorcerer levels, and we want to take Wizard at level 3. So we have a choice of starting with Sorcerer or Cleric as our first level. Starting with Sorcerer gets us Constitution save proficiency, which is really nice for this character because one of the great things about it is that you can basically never lose concentration on spells. Con save proficiency, damage reduction, and the Sanctuary spell all combined to make this character incredible at concentrating on things. So you can play very risky and still be extremely safe. For our cantrip selection as a sorcerer, because we're going to be using intelligence as our main casting stat, all of our sorcerer spells we want to take utility spells or spells that don't care about our casting stat, because we're going to take very low charisma. So for our cantrips, we're going to take utility cantrips rather than ones that are offensive. So we can take things like Blade Ward, Mage Hand, which is very good for this character. Since our damage is going to be lightning based, enemies being wet will double all the damage that we do. Having a Mage Hand to throw a bottle of water at enemies is incredibly powerful and will save us a lot of turns. So this can help enable the combo just with this cantrip entirely for free. So Mage Hand is an amazing spell for us as well. Minor Illusion, of course, is great for every party and can group enemies up for our AoE damage. And then finally, Light is just a really nice utility cantrip as well. None of these care about our casting stat, so we're taking all of these in order to get the utility that we need. Blade Ward is also a really important ability for this character. We're going to have a lot of damage reduction, so the damage resistance will combine incredibly well with that. A little more on that later on in the build. For our spell selection here, again, we're looking for spells that don't require us to have high casting stat, and we need utility spells. So we're going to take defensive spells like Shield, and we might as well grab Magic Missile. This doesn't use our casting stat, and in the early game, Magic Missile can be a really nice way to kill enemies. For the first couple levels with this build, you're going to be using just a light crossbow and Magic Missiles, because we won't have our casting fully online until level 3. For our Sorcerer subclass, we're going to take Draconic Sorcerer, and the Dragon Ancestor that we're taking is White Dragon Sorcerer, because that gets us the spell Armor of Agathis. This is an Abjuration Wizard build. We're going to have a ton of damage reduction in order to keep the Armor of Agathis HP alive, and enemies will be taking tons of retaliation damage every time they hit us. This makes us extremely tanky, so being able to take White Dragon Ancestor to get Armor of Agathis, very important to this character, and why we need sorcerer levels for this build. Finally, for our ability selection, our casting with this character is going to be based off of intelligence. So unusually for a sorcerer build, we're taking 8 charisma, and instead are going to take 17 intelligence. We intend to use Ethel's Hair, which can give you a +1 to any attribute to boost our intelligence to 18. It's not mandatory for this build to do that, but it does make the feat requirements significantly easier, and you're already playing a build this powerful, so you might as well go all out and use all of the options that you have to boost the character even further. We're also going to take 16 dexterity to maximize our initiative and 14 constitution. We don't actually need that much HP because we're going to have temp HP from Armor of Agathis and a bunch of damage reduction, so lower constitution is totally fine. Round that out with 10 wisdom, and there's your ability score selection. This character also benefits tremendously from the Gloves of Dexterity. There's no other pair of gloves that we particularly need. So once you have those, you can drop your Dexterity down to 8 and then boost your Constitution and Wisdom, and that will allow you to have better saving throws and additional HP as well. So once you get the Gloves of Dexterity, drop your Dexterity down to 8. It'll be replaced with 18 from the Gloves of Dexterity. Boost your Constitution to 16, take your Wisdom up to 14, and then you can put the last 2 points into Strength. This will get you a little bit more carry weight, and since this character does intend to wear heavy armor, carry weight can actually be an issue for us, because we're going to have heavy armor, a shield, a bunch of scrolls and potions and water bottles and things like that, so having 10 strength is actually kind of nice for this character to make sure that you can carry everything that you need to pick up. Finally, for our skill selection, there's no particular skills that you need for this character. You probably are not, with 8 charisma, going to be the party face for the character, so you can take whatever you feel like taking here for flavor. This character usually won't be making a lot of skill checks. That's it for level 1. I'm just going to reset our attributes to the starting values that we want here. Let's move on to level 2. Character level 2, we're going to immediately branch out from Sorcerer and take a level of Cleric. This is part of the core combination of the character, but also gets us a number of other things. For our Cleric subclass, we're going to take Tempest Cleric. Tempest Cleric get heavy armor and shield proficiency, which is really good for this character. We want to be as tanky as possible, and heavy armor gets us access to a lot of armors that increase our damage reduction. That will combine with the damage reduction that we're getting from Abjuration Wizard to make this character impossible to kill in the late game. So having this heavy armor proficiency is extremely powerful, in addition, of course, to the bonuses that we get from Tempest Domain that will let us one-shot enemies extremely reliably. We get Fog Cloud as a domain spell, which is a pretty nice one, because this doesn't care about our casting stat, so our low wisdom won't affect that. Thunderwave you won't want to cast from your Tempest Domain spells, because it'll use your wisdom as your casting stat, so don't use the Cleric version of Thunderwave. We also get Wrath of the Storm. This is a pretty nice reaction for a build that intends to take attacks from enemies. Enemies will attack this character and take a bunch of damage from Armor of Agathis, do very little damage to us, and then we can use Wrath of the Storm for additional lightning retaliation damage, which to wet enemies can be tons of extra damage. Just like with our Sorcerer levels, since our casting stat is going to be low from Cleric, we don't want to take anything that uses our Wisdom. Instead, we're going to pick up utility cantrips that don't care what our casting stat is. So, Guidance, of course, one of the best spells in the game that can boost this character's utility for the party enormously. Resistance, very nice spell that can be helpful in some events when you have to make saving throws and dialogue as well. And then for our last utility spell, it doesn't really matter what we pick here. We already have Light, so we don't really need Produce Flame. You can take Thaumaturgy, but you won't be making dialogue checks, so I like to take Bursting Sinew just because blowing up corpses is kind of funny. Finally, for our prepared, there's a bug currently with Cleric where you get 2 extra skills, so you can use these to pick up any other skills. Doesn't really matter what you pick again, just take things that you think are flavorful for the character to know. And finally, we get to prepare a spell. The reason we only get 1 spell is because our Wisdom is only 10 and we only have 1 Cleric level. Later on in the game, when we get the Gloves of Dexterity, we'll be able to prepare multiple Cleric spells. At low levels, the most important one to prepare is Sanctuary, a bonus action that can save yourself. And one of the things that's so great about this character is we are the best haste caster in the game, bar none. This character has con save proficiency and damage reduction, so we'll almost never fail concentration checks. We can twin haste on multiple party members, and we have Sanctuary to protect ourselves, so we'll never drop concentration on haste. That's one of the really nice things about this character. Once we get more spells, we're going to also want Create Water and Healing Word and Bless, and those will be the 4 spells that we can prepare as a Cleric that we'll be able to do later on, so those are the spells that you're looking for from your Cleric level. At level 3, we're taking yet another class, and that class is, of course, Wizard. This is where our offensive capabilities really come online, because with our 3rd level of Wizard, we get not only to take damaging cantrips, since those will use our intelligence, but also we can now learn Wizard spells from scrolls. We'll have been collecting as many spell scrolls as we can find, so we should effectively have normal Wizard spellcasting for this level, with level 2 spells available, so we can learn powerful offensive spells like Scorching Ray and Cloud of Daggers and things like that, and utility spells like Misty Step from scrolls. For our cantrips at this level, we're just going to take the trifecta of damaging cantrips. We're going to take Firebolt, Ray of Frost, and Bone Chill, and that gives us all of the ranged cantrip damage options that we need. This will let us choose the right damage type for the scenario, freeze water with Ray of Frost, set things on fire with Firebolt, so again, we have a lot of utility here. For our spell selection at this level, the important spells to know and prepare from your Wizard level, let me actually go to prepared spells. Ignore the higher level spells here, these are just ones that Gale has learned from scrolls in this playthrough. The important ones to know and prepare are Witch Bolt and Chromatic Orb. These are going to be the key spells for our offense. Chromatic Orb for lightning can be twin cast with our sorcerer levels. And if cast with a level 1, 2, or 3 spell slot is the highest damage single target option that we have. Witch Bolt, if cast with a level 4, 5, or 6 spell slot, is the highest damage single target option. These are both attack rolls, so they can critically hit, and this is what's going to let us delete enemies in a single blow. So Chromatic Orb and Witch Bolt are really important. Of course, we also want utility spells like Long Strider and Enhanced Leap, and you can pick up things like Find Familiar and Grease for more control and utility options as well. So your prepared spell list at this level will include some level 2 spells, so it might look something like you won't need Witch Bolt yet, so it might look something like Chromatic Orb, Misty Step, Cloud of Daggers, and Long Strider or something like that. Because you're going to be including some level 2 spells and utility spells, depending exactly on what scrolls you've found. But knowing Chromatic Orb and Witch Bolt is very important, so make sure you select them when you level if you haven't found scrolls of them. At character level 4, we're going to take our second level of Tempest Cleric to get access to Destructive Wrath. This will let us roll the maximum damage for our lightning or thunder spells, in this case the lightning version of Chromatic Orb or Witch Bolt, or of course other lightning spells that we are going to use like Chain Lightning or Lightning Bolt as well. The reason that this is so powerful is that Witch Bolt in particular has a d12 die for its damage. It does 1d12 per level that you upcast it. And so when you use Destructive Wrath, that guarantees that each of those d12s is doing the maximum of 12 damage. You can then double that damage because it's an attack roll. So if you get a critical hit, and you can use sources of guaranteed critical hits to get that, you double the damage, and you can double it again because wet enemies are vulnerable to lightning damage. This will let us, in the endgame, do a guaranteed just burst of 300 damage, which is enough to kill most bosses outright, and also enough to win encounters very easily just by chunking the most dangerous enemy on the field. We can also do this with Chromatic Orb, and you can twin cast Chromatic Orb as a sorcerer once we get Twin Spell, and you can cast it on 2 different characters in order to delete 2 enemies at once. So Destructive Wrath is incredibly powerful. We also get some more cleric spells to prepare. At this level, before we have additional wisdom, you're going to want Sanctuary and Create Water. Create Water, of course, will allow us to set up the vulnerability to lightning damage. That is what this build is centered around. At character level 5, we're going to go back for a second sorcerer level, which is going to get us access to meta magic so we can now twin spells. This is incredibly powerful for this character because doubling up on Chromatic Orb for maximized quadrupled lightning damage is going to let us delete 2 enemies already at this level. And this, of course, only gets more powerful the higher level spell slots we have. Because we're level 5, we have 3rd level spells, so Chromatic Orb is still going to be our best damage source for single target damage at this level. Once we get 4th level spell slots, Witch Bolt is going to be our go-to. We also, because we are a 5th level caster now with a level of Wizard, can scribe 3rd level Wizard scrolls. So that gives us access to spells like Lightning Bolt, which of course synergizes with what the character is doing tremendously, and Haste. This character is the best haste caster in the game, bar none, because we're going to have Meta Magic Twin Spell, allowing us to cast haste on multiple characters at once. We will have the damage reduction later on from Abjuration Wizard, but we also have the ability to just cast Sanctuary on ourselves. So a really good turn for this character is to Twin Spell Haste and then cast Sanctuary, and then enemies will not be able to attack the character to break their haste, so you can support your party members in addition to the enormous amounts of damage. For our second twin spell, or for our second meta magic, in addition to twin spell, you can actually take any of these. Extended spell is kind of interesting because we do buff our party members sometimes, so there are some extended effects that we might want, but distant spell is usually just the safest choice. There's cases where you're out of range and distant spell lets you do it. It only costs 1 sorcery point, so it's very cheap. The other thing about Twin Spell is it does cost 3 sorcery points to twin a 3rd level spell, either an upcasted Chromatic Orb or a Haste, and we only have 2 sorcery points at this level, but you can create sorcery points over your maximum using Create Sorcery Points, so don't worry about only having 2 points. For our spell selection from Sorcerer at this level, we're looking for a utility spell that doesn't require us to have high charisma, so something like Mage Armor. This character will be in armor, but maybe you have a party member that needs it. You can also use Disguise Self. Doesn't really matter what we select here. At character level 6, we actually have a choice of what level we're going to take next. You can start taking wizard levels right away in order to improve your defenses a little bit faster. And that version of the build also burns through spell slots a little less quickly, so if you don't have easy ways to refresh those, or if you're long resting less frequently, then taking wizard levels first may make for a smoother playthrough. But the most powerful version of the character is going to take a 3rd level of Sorcerer in order to get Quicken Spell right away. Obviously, Quicken Spell is going to let us cast 2 spells in a turn, and that's incredibly strong. And in particular for this character, it's going to let us quicken Create Water to get an enemy wet, followed by immediately blasting them with a Chromatic Orb, Witch Bolt, Chain Lightning, or Lightning Bolt. So Quicken Spell is very helpful to this character. You do have to be a little bit careful with how quickly you're burning spell slots, because we want those to restore our sorcery points, to spend on meta magic, and of course to spend on our actual spells. But this is going to make you the strongest that you can possibly be in fights at this point. For our spell selection at this level, there isn't really anything that we particularly need, so just grab a utility spell. You can pick up something like Misty Step, which of course you're always going to want prepared, or Enhanceability is very nice to just have as a backup in a party, so it's another utility spell that you can have. Whatever you haven't found scrolls for at this point that you want as a utility spell, just, again, don't select combat spells with your sorcerer levels. At this next level, now we're going back for Wizard, and we're going to start improving our character's defenses. Up until this point, having heavy armor and a shield has probably been good enough, and the shield spell has probably been good enough to keep you alive pretty easily. This character's high armor class and defenses are just very good as a result of that. But we now want to get our Abjuration Wizard levels so that we can start tanking for real. So we're going to take a 2nd level of Wizard, and the level that the subclass we're taking is, of course, Abjuration, which gets us Arcane Ward. Arcane Ward gives you the ability to reduce incoming damage. Now, it doesn't say in the tooltip how this works, but it reduces, you can have up to double your wizard level, so at this point 4, stacks of Arcane Ward, which you generate by casting Abjuration spells. When you take incoming damage, it's reduced by the amount of Arcane Ward that you have, and then your Arcane Ward stacks decrease by 1. At this level, reducing damage by 4 is relevant, but not super impressive at level 7. But as we continue to stack additional damage reduction, it's going to reduce incoming damage dramatically. And when you combine it with damage resistance, extra damage reduction from items that we're going to use, and heavy armor effects as well, then you can reduce incoming damage by a tremendous amount. So Arcane Ward will make us ridiculously tanky. For our spell selection at this level, we are just going to pick up anything that we haven't found in a scroll. These are all 1st level spells, and we now have access to 4th level spells, so what you choose at this level mostly won't matter, but you can play Pokemon and collect any spells that you haven't managed to find yet. At level 8, we're going to continue to increase our wizard level to boost our damage reduction, so we now reduce incoming damage by 6. And again, what spells we select here are mostly going to depend on what scrolls we've found. Just take anything that you haven't found in scrolls. Some spells that are pretty nice to have at this level. Darkness is still always useful, can make you immune to enemy ranged attacks, even though this character doesn't have an inherent way to see through it. But there are some encounters where having darkness can be useful. This character can also use Shadow Blade and just wade into melee. We're going to have a lot of Abjuration Wizard damage reduction and a lot of damage return and heavy armor and a shield. So you can actually just go fight in melee if you want to. It's not really the optimal strategy, but it's fun for some encounters, and this character is so absurdly powerful that you can get away with it. Then we're taking our 4th wizard level, and of course we get another cantrip, and we can pick up Shocking Grasp. This is probably the better way to wade into melee with this character, because of course it synergizes with the lightning damage that we're already doing. We don't need it earlier because up until you have 4 or so Abjuration Wizard levels, you still want to avoid melee with this character, but once you have a bunch of damage reduction, this character can run up to bosses and use Shocking Grasp to disable their reactions. So it gives you yet another tool to deal with honor mode enemies. And in particular on honor mode, disabling reactions turns off a lot of legendary actions. So this is a character, for those of you who really love Shocking Grasp and want to make use of it, this character makes use of it better than pretty much any other character. Again, for our spell selection, we're mostly focused on just filling out any spell slots that we haven't already, because we are now level 9, so we have up to 5th level spells that we can learn from scrolls, so we're focusing on grabbing those. Some 5th level spells that you're going to want to look out for are, of course, Conjure Elemental, which is very, very powerful, and will give you something that you can spend your 6th level spell slot on when you've refreshed it a bunch. But mostly you're just looking to fill out your earlier spell levels here. For our feat, we're going to take Alert. This character just deletes enemies on the first turn of combat, so if you go before they do, then they don't ever get to act. So having Alert means that you can pass off any initiative gear. Up until this point, you might have been wearing some initiative gear on this character, but now you can pass it off to a party member that might need it more. With our 5th wizard level, we now reduce incoming damage by 10, and this is where things start to get pretty exciting. A pretty common attack pattern for enemies at this point in the game is to hit you with 3 attacks that do about 20 damage each. So if an enemy attacks you 3 times for 20 damage, and you have resistance to that type of damage, remember that we know Blade Ward as a cantrip, and we're going to be using gear that gives us damage resistance. We can also cast spells like Resistance to Elements to gain resistance to relevant damage types. So if an enemy hits us 3 times for 20 damage, their first attack will be reduced to 10, and then reduced by 10, so we'll take 0 damage. They attack us again, we will have 9 Arcane Ward stacks left, so we'll take 1 damage, and they attack us again, and we will have 8 Arcane Ward stacks, so we'll take 2 damage. So of the 60 damage that they've attempted to do to us, we will have taken 3. We also will be able to have cast Armor of Agathis at level 5, and so enemies will be taking 25 damage each time they hit us. What that means is that the enemy who has attacked us for 60 damage has done 3 and taken 75. And that's before you add in any other bonuses that might be affecting that. So once you get up to around 10 Arcane Ward stacks or so, you become extraordinarily difficult to kill. This also, of course, gets us access to level 3 spells, and there's one here that's really important. There's no scroll of Counterspell in the game, so we haven't been able to learn this up until this point, but Counterspell is incredibly powerful, obviously, and also it's an Abjuration spell, so it gives us an easy way to refresh our Arcane Ward stacks. So during combat, when you counter a spell, you're going to gain 3 Arcane Ward stacks back, which will make you even tankier. Another Abjuration spell that you can use to refresh Arcane Ward stacks is Glyph of Warding. This one you can learn from a scroll, so we'll have had it already. But this is going to be our main offensive combat spell. In addition to our one-shot kill combo, Glyph of Warding does AoE damage, and that damage can be cold or lightning damage. Which synergizes, of course, with our plan of getting enemies wet, and so we can use this to blow up whole encounters while also refreshing our tanking stats. Also, of course, if you somehow haven't found a Scroll of Haste, then this character definitely wants to know Haste, so make sure you pick that up. Sleet Storm is really good for ending whole encounters. Also, spells like Hypnotic Pattern that require concentration, this character's excellent at. Obviously, you're going to collect all the scrolls that you find as you play the game and use and cast those spells, but those are some spells that are very much worth paying attention to. At character level 11, we're going to go back for a level of Sorcerer. Now that we have 10 Arcane Ward stacks, which is kind of the break point where it gets really powerful, we just want to grab another feat. So we're taking one more level of Sorcerer, which is going to get us a feat to max out our intelligence. You can also, on this character, take Heavy Armor Master if you are happy with 20 intelligence and plan to use the Mirror to boost your intelligence by 2, in addition to Ethel's Hair. So 20 intelligence is fine, 22 is obviously better on this character, but Heavy Armor Master is also a great option for this character to increase our damage reduction even further. Damage reduction stacks incredibly well with itself, and we're always going to be in heavy armor, which is usually going to reduce incoming damage by 2. So increasing that to 5 and then adding 10 from our wizard levels is going to make it extremely difficult for enemies to actually harm us. So Heavy Armor Master, another great option for this character. The intelligence is more important, but there are story events that can do that, so either of these 2 feats is going to be great. For our cantrip selection, we're going to take True Strike to annoy people in the comments. And then for our spell selection, you can see here how many spells we know already. All these yellow spells are spells we know from various sources. So just pick something up that you don't have access to that you might want prepared frequently for utility. And finally, at character level 12, we're taking our 6th level of Wizard to cap out our Arcane Ward stacks at 12, which isn't as many, of course, as a fully classed Abjuration Wizard would have, so we're not as invincible as a monoclass Abjuration Wizard, but we get all of this tanking ability in addition to all of the incredible offensive potential of this character, which is a very good trade-off in Baldur's Gate. Usually you're happy to trade defense for offense, and this character makes very few compromises on both. You're still nigh invincible to most reasonable sources of enemy damage that you might actually face, and against ones that are overwhelming, you have a lot more defensive options in the form of spells like Sanctuary to keep yourself alive. And of course, you can just delete enemies before they ever get to cast a spell. We also get Projected Ward, so we can use this to protect our allies as a reaction, which can matter in some cases, so definitely nice to have that as well. They probably won't be set up as much to tank as this character is, but in an emergency, this is a very useful panic button to have. For your spell selection here, of course, you're just grabbing whatever spells that you haven't managed to find scrolls of that you might think that you want, and that is the Invincible Lightning Lord. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed looking at this build, and I hope it helps you win your honor mode runs in incredible style, but of course we can improve the character even further with items, so let's talk about those. For items for this character, we're basically looking for two things. We want to increase our killing power by increasing our ability to hit with our spells and our spell save DC, so we can use control spells and our damaging combos more effectively. And we want to increase our survivability and tanking power, so our items are going to all be designed around that. Firstly, let's look at our weapons. So, the best in-slot weapon for this character, and this character is the best user in the game for this staff, is Marka-Heshkir. We can twin cast the Chain Lightning from it, because it's still bugged, so you can double cast it. You're going to want to set Marka-Heshkir to Lightning, of course, because this is a Lightning-themed character, and so you are going to do a tremendous amount of additional damage. It also gives you bonuses to your spell save DC and spell attack rolls. Up until you get Marka-Heshkir, which is your best in-slot endgame item, the Morning Frost is a pretty nice option for this character. We do a lot of cold damage as well, and inflicting chilled on the enemy can double that cold damage in ways that don't require us to get them wet, so Morning Frost is also a great option. Or just any staff that increases our spell save DC or hit chance with our spells is going to be excellent for this character until you can pick up the endgame item. We also want heavy armor. Because we're a Tempest Cleric, we get heavy armor proficiency, and we're looking for heavy armor with damage reduction. This will stack with our Arcane Ward damage reduction to give us even more resistance to damage. So in the early game, the Adamantine Splint is going to be our best source of damage reduction, and then the Rippling Force Mail is also a really nice option for this character. This gives you Force Conduit, which can stack up to 7 times and reduce incoming bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. So against enemies with physical damage, the Rippling Force Mail can give you tons of damage reduction, which will then combine with your ability to cast Blade Ward to do lots of retaliation damage with Armor of Agathis. In the end game, the Armor of Persistence just reduces incoming damage by 2 and gives you permanent Blade Ward, which will allow you to resist damage even better. Combine that with the Helm of Baldurin for the ultimate defensive setup. This will remove your ability to be stunned and to be critically hit. And one of the only things that is a danger to this character is critical hits, which can do spikes of damage that overcome your damage reduction. So having critical hit immunity is really important. For more offensive setup with your helmet slot, the Hood of the Weave gives you a bonus to spell attack rolls and spell save DC, or the Fistbreaker Helm gives you save DC and initiative if you find that you are not able to go before enemies, or if you didn't take alert in order to squeeze in a different feat. We also, of course, get a shield, and either the Sentinel Shield or Ketheric's Shield are going to be your best options. Ketheric's Shield is usually going to be better for this character. We have Alert and 16 Dexterity, so we don't need a ton of additional initiative, so Ketheric's Shield will give us more accuracy with our spells, which of course is incredibly powerful. On top of that, we can add another either offensive or defensive item slot with our amulet. The amulet of the devout, makes it easier to land our spells, and so any lockdown spells that we're casting, because this character again can use control spells extremely efficiently, will be more accurate with the amulet of the devout. An alternative is the Amulet of Greater Health. This makes it even harder for you to ever fail a concentration save, and of course increases your natural HP, which makes your damage reduction even more efficient. You can think of damage reduction as a multiplier on your hit points, which is why it's so powerful when combined with Armor of Agathis. So the Amulet of Greater Health, giving you extra hit points, makes you extraordinarily tanky. For our glove slot for this character, I already talked about how the Gloves of Dexterity are very synergistic, letting you increase your stats, most notably your Wisdom and your Constitution, so you can use a more offensive amulet than the Greater Health amulet. And this gives you plus 9 to your initiative at base with 18 Dexterity and Alert, and the bonus to attack rolls also applies to your spell attacks. If you want a more aggressive option, the Helldusk Gloves give you a bonus to your spell attacks and spell save DC, so that's going to be a solid option as well. For your boots, I feel like there's mostly only one option for this character, the Boots of Striding. This prevents you from falling prone or being moved, and you're always going to be concentrating on something on this character, and since you can't lose concentration normally to almost any effect, the only way you're dropping concentration on spells is if you get knocked prone, which the Boots of Striding prevent. Another way to boost our offensive power is with the Ring of Feywild Sparks. Now this, the tooltip on this item is wrong, but it gives you a +1 bonus to your spell save DCs, which is just not listed anywhere in the item description, so you may not know that it does that, but it does, which makes it the best in-slot ring for most casters. The Killer's Sweetheart also allows us to guarantee critical hits, which makes our burst damage combo significantly more effective. Finally, to round things out, we've got our bow slot, and the dead shot makes you more likely to critically hit with your lightning bolts, which of course is very good as well, or you can use the Hellrider longbow to increase your initiative. The Darkfire shortbow to give you resistance to fire and cold damage is also an option, which I forgot to put in the character's inventory, but that's another good option as well if you want a more defensive setup for the character. A couple other items that are really important for us to have access to. Bottles of water, either used by this character or more likely thrown by an ally with multiple attacks, are really good. We want enemies wet as much as possible because all of our damage is lightning and cold, so water doubles all of that damage. And any way to refresh our spell slots is extraordinarily valuable. We have a lot of uses for our 6th level spells, so Mark of Heshgir gives us a free cast of a spell, the Spellcrux Amulet lets us restore a spell slot. That will let us cast Armor of Agathis at 6th level and then still use that spell slot for a Witch Bolt or something like that, which this character uses its spell slots better than basically any other character. Other ways to refresh lower level spell slots, like the elixirs, are really important as well, so you can build up sorcery points, since we're going to want those to twin or quicken our spells. Finally, your cloak slot doesn't really matter for this character, but I kind of enjoy the Fleshmelter cloak just for a little bit of extra retaliation damage, just because it's funny when enemies hit you and take even more damage in return. For our ultimate endgame setup, any of these options are great. What I usually will end up with on this character is the Helm of Baldur, the Armor of Persistence, because that gives you incredible defensive capabilities, the Amulet of the Devout, Ketheric's Shield, and Mark of Heshgir as our weapon, the Gloves of Dexterity, the Boots of Striding, and then the 2 rings that are mentioned. And then also we will use the Dead Shot in order to increase our critical hit damage. This gives us a decent amount of armor class. The Armor of Persistence, not the Rippling Force Mail. This gives us a decent amount of armor class with 23, and the ability to resist most incoming damage because of our damage resistances, and the reduction that we get from having high arcane ward stacks. Finally, I should mention a couple spells that are really important to look out for on this character. A Scroll of Protection from Energy, you can learn Protection from Energy, and that's very useful for this character. It's an Abjuration spell, so it stacks your Arcane Ward stacks. Yes, it's concentration, but in some fights you just want resistance to a certain kind of damage, and Protection from Energy allows you to have that. Fire Shield is a nice option as well. This is surprisingly not an abjuration spell, but it can give you resistance to fire or cold for fights where that's relevant, as well as additional retaliation damage. Lasts for 10 turns and doesn't take your concentration, so you can use this in addition to concentrating on something else. High-level spells that you want to look out for are Globe of Invulnerability, obviously fight winning for pretty much any character, so very, very important to have this. Wall of Ice and Chain Lightning are really good for this character as well, because we're doing cold and wet damage with the wet condition. So Wall of Ice will do double damage, Chain Lightning will do double damage, and you can use these to blow up encounters that have lots of enemies, in addition to our ability to just one-shot single tough targets. So that's your overall item setup. Also, because this character can be a little bit complex to play and has a couple different play patterns, I'm just going to give a couple quick strategic notes. So, for the first 2 levels, you're just going to run around with a light crossbow and use magic missile and shield from your sorcerer levels to do extra damage and keep you alive. Once you're level 3, your full wizard spellcasting comes online. At that point, you're a better wizard than a level 3 wizard would be, because you're just a wizard who also has heavy armor and sorcerer abilities. So your full spellcasting is online as of level 3. Starting at level 4, you have the burst damage combo. It probably won't be enough to outright kill enemies at that level, but you can still do a lot of damage. And you can also just play as a classic control caster with the spells that you've found from your scrolls, as well as a support character for your party, because you can cast Bless, run in with heavy armor to draw enemy attacks, and use your damage output in spellcasting. At level 5, you get the option to twin haste, and so when you need to be in support mode, you can twin haste and then cast Sanctuary on yourself, and then your party can just go to town completely safely with massive buffs. So that's going to be your play pattern for the first 5 levels. As you get later in levels, your one-shot combo gets more and more potent, so you're going to be able to start just blowing enemies up with Chromatic Orb or Witch Bolt critical hits, especially once you get access to Luck of the Far Realms from an Illithid power, if you're taking that route, and the Killer's Sweetheart Ring. You also, at later levels, of course, get to stack your defensive capabilities. And when we get to level 12, we have a maximum of 12 Arcane Ward stacks. Usually what you're going to want to do is use a 6th level Armor of Agathis. That'll get you 6 stacks. And then spend a level 4 spell slot on any other Abjuration spell in order to stack to 10, and then use a level 2 to stack the last 2. You actually usually start the day with 2 thanks to a bug, so you won't always need to spend the level 2 spell slot for the last 2, but that's the most efficient use of spell slots to stack your Arcane Ward charges to 12. Then you can use an item like the Spellcrux Amulet to refresh your level 6 spell slot, so that you have that for combat. Also, when you're actually casting your burst damage combination, Chromatic Orb for Lightning can be twinned with a sorcerer, so you can blast 2 enemies with it, and if you're using a level 1 or 2 spell slot, it's actually more damage than Witch Bolt, so you're going to want to use Chromatic Orb for Lightning in those cases, even against single targets, but anytime you're hitting 2 targets, you want Chromatic Orb, because Witch Bolt can no longer be twinned as of, I want to say, patch 6, a long time ago anyways. With higher level spell slots, Witch Bolt is more damage to single targets, so this is going to be your go-to, but bear in mind that Witch Bolt is a concentration spell, so if you're concentrating on a spell like Haste or Bless, you may still want to use Chromatic Orb instead, unless you're willing to give up the concentration. And if you've hasted yourself, definitely don't use Witch Bolt, because you'll then end haste on yourself and stun yourself. So just a couple strategic notes for when you're playing the character. And of course, remember, I get this question a lot with these characters with burst damage combos. Don't you have to long rest after every fight, or so this character is bad against enemies who are immune to lightning? The answer to that is, of course not. You have all of the spells available to a wizard, just you also have the option to, once per day, just win an encounter outright. So you actually can go for longer without resting than most other characters. Just because you have this option doesn't mean that it's the only thing that you can do, so keep that in mind. Good advice for life as well as Baldur's Gate 3. Alright, my friends, I hope that you have enjoyed this video, and I hope that it helps you have a blast in Honor Mode. Pun, of course, definitely not intended. If you have enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a comment and hit like. Helps me out with the algorithm, so I appreciate you taking the time to do that. And of course, you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 build guides and other strategy game analysis. Cheers, my friends. I'll catch you next time.